Welcome back to the Scar Stories podcast. My name is Nicole Golden and I'm the host, and I have two brand new friends. In fact, we literally just met a few minutes ago. I can't really say in person, but I feel like Zoom has become the new in person for 2020.
In person.
Exactly. This is Jason and Dena Hobbs, and I have their book right here. We'll link it and everything, but it's going to be backwards on your screen. But they just released When Anxiety Strikes, and I've been reading it and enjoying it. And we're going to talk a little bit about their personal stories and then the book. And I'm pretty excited about this one. So thanks so much for joining us, you guys. Where are you joining us from? I don't even know. Where are you guys joining us from? I know.
We're currently in my office. So I'm a clinician in private practice, and we're in my office in a town called Centerville, but technically it's Warner Robins, Greater Macon area of Middle Georgia.
Okay. I lied to you because I do know that because we used to drive through Macon all the time, and I remember that, and then forgetting.
Okay.
My dad was a missionary with an parachurch organization, so we'd go up and down the East Coast constantly. So Macon was a place we were in and out of on the regular basis. So
we're very close to that. There's a big Air Force base here in Warner Robins. So.
Oh, okay.
So I end up working with a really wide variety of people because there are a lot of folks that come in and out of here.
Yeah, that's kind of like Tampa. We're right by MacDill Air Force Base. So yeah. So our church has a ton of people in and out, and people who know things before we know things, and are like, "Hey, just watch the news tonight. Something exciting is gonna happen."
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's always interesting. In fact, that was told us right before they found and killed Osama bin Laden. One of our friends was like, "Hey, just pay attention to the news over the next few days. Something's gonna break." And we're like, "Oh, okay." Then it's this craziness. Anyways, okay. So let's talk a little bit. You guys wrote the book When Anxiety Strikes, and in the beginning, Dena shares a little bit of her story. So Dena, why don't you kind of catch us up? Why is this book so personal to you? We'll start with that question.
Sure. I was diagnosed with panic disorder when I was 24 years old. So that was, let me do math.
It was like 5 years ago, Dena. Don't do the math. It was 5 years ago.
Yeah. That was a couple of decades ago. But honestly, when I look back now, I can see I was anxious as a child. I don't know life before anxiety.
Wow.
But it got worse when I was in college, and it got worse when I was in seminary. Jason and I both went to seminary together.
Okay.
And then it really came to a head after I took a mission trip to Africa when I had to take some anti-malarial drugs.
Okay.
And this particular drug that I took had side effects in 20% of the population that were some really scary side effects. Panic attacks is not the worst thing that could have happened.
Yeah.
But for me, I started having panic attacks as a side effect of the drug. But I was right. I think part of why I was part of the 20% of the population is I was right for anxiety.
Okay. Yeah.
My body was wired. So that just pushed me over the edge into a pretty intense case of panic disorder, having a lot of strong panic attacks frequently.
Yeah.
So at that point, I keep, every time we're interviewed, I keep coming back to, I was so lucky that we were in such a supportive environment because people surrounded us and helped us. And I got help really quickly.
Yeah.
Which was important. My GP was great in getting me treatment, not only for the psychiatric part of the disorder, but also IBS and, everything else came along for the ride.
Yeah. That's the fun thing about mental health stuff, mental illness is like, it's not usually just anxiety or depression. It's this whole slew of other things that you're like, oh, great,
Head to toe. Yeah. So, my GP took great care of me. The professors and dean of students at the school made sure I got in with a good therapist really fast. Most of my friends were really supportive. Jason, of course, was really supportive. And I got hooked up with a good psychiatrist in good timing. So I look back and it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty really outstanding. Hard. Like even because in some of these interviews, I'll talk to people depending on their diagnosis. So I was diagnosed about 10 years ago. And even in that landscape, but the church, Christian evangelical landscape, mental illness was still very much misunderstood and misapplied and misdirected. And so we had a good support system of people who loved us, but I don't know that it was necessarily a good support system of people who were pushing us in the direction of like, this is a mental health issue. Let's get to the bottom of this. It was more like, oh, you're angry. Let's figure out why you're angry. Oh, you're that, you know, it was more, they were trying to spiritually diagnose instead of like, I think there might be something more amiss. So I think it's outstanding that you were around people to have the wherewithal to be like, hey, this is something a little bit more than spiritual. If you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
And one of the benefits that we had too, we both went to seminary, but I did a dual degree program. So I did a Master of Divinity and then was going over to Virginia Commonwealth University for their Master of Social Work.
Okay.
So I was actually in the class where we were talking about diagnostics.
Okay.
So I had DSM-4 and, you know, we're sitting there flipping through this thing, like going, oh, well, this is what this is. And I was able to talk with my professors. And so there was a way in which, part of the gift of that time is being able to understand this as an illness.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And all that meant. You know, as social workers, we talk a lot about having a biopsychosocial model. So it's like the biology, the sociology, the psychology, and kind of pulling all that together. And so, you know, it was a real benefit to be in that milieu at the time.
Yeah. And I was going to ask if you were studying all of that while she was walking through it. So
Yes.
you're like, I have my own little guinea pig. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
So fun.
Yeah.
So fun.
Sample size 1, but yeah, I was learning a lot.
It's like when Brian and I first got married and I was struggling with all this for the first couple of years of our marriage, anytime I would go to him with anything, and he's actually working from home today. That's the blessing of COVID, but so I don't know if he'll overhear this or not, but he would like start preaching part of his messages to me to help me through that. And I'm like, no. I didn't, like, you are my husband first, pastor second. If you try to preach one more thing at me, I will punch you in the nose. So anyways, we have a very real marriage.
I am not your client.
Yeah.
Yes.
You are not my
That will not
therapist,
work on me.
and I'm not your client.
Yes. I love it. Yeah. Yes, Dena, you and I will have to do more Zoom coffee dates because I'm sure we both have stories. So I was looking at I had like 2 different sets of interview questions on here, and I don't want to ask you the wrong ones because then it'll just get weird. So you kind of already mentioned that, like how, you know, anxiety, depression, mental illness, it's not just a mental issue, it's a whole body issue. And I think, you know, the danger, and you guys know that just as like, you know, Brian's a pastor, so I'm automatically in the ministry with him, which I love. And then I think if I understand correctly, so you're, Jason, would you call yourself a counselor, therapist, or both?
Either term is fine.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. I mean,
that's exactly how I describe it.
Yeah, I mean, as far as licensure, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So
Okay.
I'm one of those like master's level clinicians that exist in most states. So talking about your licensed mental health counselors, licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists, and us licensed social workers all sort of exist on that same tier of clinicians.
Okay, perfect.
Not a doctor. People will say Dr. Hobbs all the time, and we're like,
no, not that. But
no.
Yeah.
I just take it. I'd be like, yes. No, I'm just joking. And then are you both pastors? I know, Dena, you're a campus pastor at a university, correct? Or at a church? Talk to me.
Well, sure. I'll tell you a little bit about our story. So the school I was at was Union Theological, which is now Union Presbyterian. So shout out to the Presbyterians for being. But I was training to be a United Methodist pastor.
Okay.
So I served in United Methodist parishes for 6 years.
Okay.
And my anxiety came back during that time. You know how you go up and down?
Mm-hmm.
My anxiety came back during some of the stressful time. Like if the church was going through a stressful time, my anxiety would peak along with that. And then we adopted and gave birth we adopted a daughter and gave birth to a son.
Okay.
It's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
At the same time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah. Our son was born, and 5 weeks later, I was on a plane to China.
Oh my gosh.
Because God's funny.
I'm like having an anxiety attack just thinking about that. Like,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It was special.
And just
God is funny. That's one way to put it. Yes.
Yeah. Our son's first word was uh-oh. And I was like, yeah, buddy. Pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. Holy crap.
But didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all grace.
Yeah.
It's all wonderful now that
Yeah.
they're older. But so yeah, with two littles, I took family leave from ministry for gosh, what was it, 5 years? I took family leave for 5 years, and then I decided not to go back into parish ministry. I was just feeling called in a different direction. And then we became Episcopal during that time. We started visiting the Episcopal church in our area. And so now as a lay person, I still have a Master of Divinity, and I still have been ordained. That wasn't like taken away.
Yeah.
But it's weird when you change denominations, like I would have to be reordained in the Episcopal church. So I've not feel called to that. So I'll serve as a lay person, as a campus minister to all the colleges in Macon.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. Okay, that is so cool. And then Jason, what about, how do you fit into this?
For me, I grew up Southern Baptist, went to a Baptist seminary, ended up pastoring a United Methodist church as a licensed local pastor.
That is a jump.
Right. So we made that change. And then, and when that finished, and that was part of the family leave and the move here. I mean, part of that move is my father had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And so we were back here
home
to take care of that. Dena's parents are here in Warner Robins as well. So that was like, okay, we need some support for the kids because we had two at one time.
Yes.
But also to get closer to my family as well because they're close by. And so all that. So at that point, I had already gotten my license and had a small private practice. And so I just moved into private practice full time. And have been doing that since, we've been here since 2005. Yeah.
Okay. Really cool. I love that. So I want to circle back around because I'm glad we've got all that background now. So like talking about anxiety, depression being a whole body thing. So many times, like people in ministry or whatever, it's funny because I've been asked by people in ministry before, like, why do you talk about anxiety and depression? Like, almost like it's a physical thing. Like, why do you use words like diagnosed or, and that kind of like when you say the word diagnosed, it like takes the responsibility out of your hands and it makes it seem like you're not willing to. Yeah, it was an interesting conversation I was in once. And I was like, and then just kind of the fear of like psychology, like, is psychology God's truth or is that man's truth? And it tends like a lot of times people in church environments get very nervous with mental health because they can't wrap their minds around it. And one of the things that I always like to talk about is like, listen, in Genesis 3, everything broke. Like we didn't just break spiritually, we broke emotionally, physically, mentally. We broke in all of these different ways. And just like you would seek a doctor's opinion and treatment plan for yourself physically, like our brains are broken, our emotions are broken, and we need the same help. And I'm not divorcing the importance of biblical counseling. Sometimes some of us have experienced such trauma or maybe even haven't experienced trauma, but like, like you said, like you've just been wired for anxiety, like you've just battled with it for years. Like we need more than just cast your cares and anxiety on Jesus. We need the physical side. And I feel like that's something you guys really explore in your book is you offer the spiritual side of things. Like here's the spiritual lesson, but yet here's kind of the physiological things that are also happening. So talk to me a little bit, and either one of you, Jason, this might be a little bit more for you. And then Dena, I've got a practical question for you as you are really applying the stuff you guys are writing about. But talk to me, Jason, about the importance of not just necessarily landing on biblical counseling when it relates to someone who's really struggling with anxiety, depression, or for me, I have borderline personality disorder. So like slapping verses on something, especially when I've grown up as a believer my whole life.
Right.
Like, I don't need more verses, so talk to me about the importance of dealing with it, psychologically as well.
Well, I think, Nicole, I mean, you kind of keep talking about how there's so much stigma.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what we end up continuing to face is the stigma. Now, to me, one of the ways through that is what you've been talking about too, and that's understanding that our brains are an organ. I mean, if I had diabetes, I'm going to go see the endocrinologist.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about, well, what do I need to be doing in terms of insulin, or how do I treat this, or can I treat this with diet and exercise, or do I need something else?
Yeah.
I mean, your brain is an organ as well. And we know that there are areas of the brain that can become overactive. So one of the things that's very involved in anxiety is your amygdala. And that's sort of, sometimes people talk about as the fear center, but that's what fight or flight is. And that's a wonderful thing that we have been gifted with, that if there's a strong threat that comes toward us, that, your chest is going to tighten, your heart rate is going to increase, muscles tighten, your body does all these things to protect you. What happens in anxiety is there are times when we're perceiving a threat that may remind us of an old threat, and so that's more of a trauma. Or it may be that we are misperceiving the threat. And that does get into like the way that we get into thought patterns that are more what based or more catastrophic. And so we're always going to the worst case scenario. And while our bodies and our brains are wonderful, if your brain starts thinking about that scenario so hard and it becomes so real, you're next to it. So even though that thing isn't happening right now, we feel like it is.
Well, and that's why I think a lot of times
you're having all the physiological effects of that. And
a lot of times people will say, but right before they're diagnosed with anxiety or something, is like, I feel like I'm having a heart attack, or I feel like I'm,
stroke, heart attack, asthma attack, because you can't breathe, your heart is racing, you may have tingly feelings, pulsing. It's a very physical, a panic attack is a very physical experience. Anxiety, not panic attack, is still a really physical experience because our heads aren't just like put on our bodies separately. Connected. It goes all the way down. So when I have a scary thought, my stomach reacts like within seconds. And if I have scary thoughts over and over and over and over, my whole biochemistry is changed. And if my whole biochemistry has been changed for 5-10 years, that's going to take some fixing.
Some fixing. I love it. The Georgia comes out. Some fixing. But that's what I try to tell people all the time, because one of the things people will talk to me about is like, they'll have these, major things that they've needed to work through. And they're like, I've been in counseling for a little bit and it's not working. And I'm like, well, how long have you been like operating the way you've been operating? Like for me, by the time I got into counseling, I'd been operating a certain way for about 26 years. And I'm like, I'm still in counseling now. That's only 10 years versus the 26 years it took me to get to that point, So it's like, you can't rush through your healing. And so I want to talk a little bit, we were kind of moving this direction. Like Dena, in the book, you talked about, taking medication. I take medication right now. I'm on Lexapro, and I actually didn't have to start taking medication until after I had my first son. So I have 4 kids. I have a daughter and 3 boys. And so after my daughter, I had some anxiety and depression, but I was able to work through it. And then I had my son, and I don't know if it's just a different set of hormones, but it whacked me out. And so I've been on and off it since then. There's seasons where I get back on, then there'll be times where I'm like, okay, I think I'm okay, and I'll come off. And I've battled, I don't know if you felt this way, but I've kind of battled with it as being a crutch. Like I've almost been like, am I just not strong enough to handle it on my own? And, but one of the conversations I just had with my counselor, Kevin, doggies, and we all just collectively relaxed. It's like dogs are just so relaxing. But, one of the conversations Kevin and I had just recently, I was like, is it a crutch? And he was like, it's not a crutch. He was like, you're going through a bunch of new stuff, and then you still have the stress of COVID and everything else. And he's like, sometimes our bodies just need the extra serotonin because we've been giving out so much. So, with being on medication, have you had any of those same feelings as I've had, or has it been easier? Have you been able to see it more directly?
Well, let me talk about it in stages. The first time I went on medication, right, I got really sick really fast.
Okay.
And my doctor was really clear, you're not going to come out of this without some medication help. And so I just was so sick at that point. I was like, whatever it takes to make me not feel this horrible way. Yes, please. And it took a while. That was a while back, and the medications are a little better now. So it took a while for me to feel better, even on the medication. So I had to trust that was going to be okay. But then I started feeling so much better. And then after I had been better for a while, he was like, okay, I think you're ready to come off of it. And okay, this is important. I came off of it really slow and with the doctor's help. Do not just quit taking your antidepressant or if you're on a benzodiazepine for any period of time, do not just quit taking your med, because that will mess you. Your body is chemistry, and it will mess you up.
Yes.
So that's super important.
I've done it slow, and then one time I did it fast, and I almost took myself to the ER. So yeah, I can back up that statement.
Yeah.
So yes.
So my doctor weaned me off, and I went for, a couple decades without being on medication. And I had some anxiety peaks during that time, but I was able to work it out with therapy and lifestyle changes, and that was okay. But then I hit another really strong peak where just like I could tell my body chemistry wasn't right, and I was in a really bad place. And Jason was working in an office with a psychiatrist, and I was like, I think it's time for me to go in. And she was, we need to get you calmed down. And she really explained it to me in a way that if I always just function barely, like I'm barely making it, I'm really still anxious. So she's like, let's get you to a point where you're like baseline, actual normal baseline. And then, start healing, and then we'll see about getting you off. And so she really talked me into taking, she worked real hard with me. I love her. She talked me into taking really what I needed to be taken. And I felt so, and like within a week, I felt so much better. And I was like, if this were just psychological, I would not feel the energy. I just was moving slow and couldn't get things done. And that's when the depression hits too.
Yes. You beat yourself up. Yeah.
The return of energy, and then I could think normal thoughts again, and I could accomplish tasks again. And to be honest, I haven't come off medication since then, because my dad's real sick, and then we get COVID, and it's like, that movie Airplane. This isn't the day to get, what did he?
Oh, well, in the movie Airplane, he's running around saying, well, I picked the wrong time to quit sniffing glue. And,
But
Yeah.
to give up my antidepressant.
Yes, exactly.
Then we'll have that conversation. And I don't feel like it's a crutch anymore. I feel like if I need it, I need it. And if I can go without it, then with a doctor's help, and with a thoughtful conversation, I'll do that intentionally.
Well, and Nicole, that's part of where, when we get into talking about that stigma again, and the way that we love to separate mental health and physical health, which I think is a false way that we do that. I hate to even use those terms, but it's kind of what we all know. But, you would never say some of the things to someone who has a mental illness that somebody, again, that has diabetes or has a heart condition or that has a broken leg. I mean, you're going to say, hey, let's go get this taken care of. Let's get it set right. You take this medication because it's necessary for your body to function.
100%. It's so funny. Like, we are so on the same page, because that's exactly how I try to describe it to people. It's like, if you went in for bronchitis and your doctor's like, oh, you're overreacting, it's just all in your head, just go and pray some more. I'm like, that seems ludicrous, but that's what we do with mental health. So you said a word, Dena, you said wean. And I remember, even in my own personal journey with all this, before I was even on medication, I would have different conversations with different people. And these were mainly believers, because bless our hearts, we try so hard and get it so wrong sometimes. But, and they would say, I don't want to be on anything that I have to wean off of, because that means that my body's addicted to it. And so I think there becomes this, Jason, you're laughing, but talk a little, maybe someone who's watching this is really struggling with that. I don't want to be on anything that I have to wean off, because then that means my body is addicted. So what would you say to someone about that? And it's someone who really needs medicine, but is avoiding it because of the weaning word.
So I have something to say about that, but if you have something. First of all, I think people with anxiety have control issues.
Really?
Are you controlling, Dena? I will say I am. But
well, let's reframe that. I mean, there's a way in which sometimes we talk about things as controlling, or that's a real pejorative, like a negative, but it comes out of a sense of chaos around
For sure.
It's trying to regain structure. It's not even that you have to be in control. It's just that you need that feeling of control.
Yeah.
I love that explanation. I feel better already. I'm like, that's exactly.
Yeah, it's not that you have to have it be a certain way, but just
Yeah.
to not have that chaos.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
especially with anxiety, I mean, that the chaos feels overwhelming. And so, yes, some way you can get that together.
Yeah. So because I struggle with control issues, I never want to go on medication. Like that's never my go-to for anything because it's given up a piece of control for me, right?
Yes.
But to trust my doctor, and I think that's real important to have a good relationship with both your general practitioner and if you do end up with a psychiatrist. Like you have to have relationship and rapport and trust there. And they have to respect you. You know, you've got to be able to say your part too, and you've got to be able to listen to them. But when I get to a point where I can trust my doctor and they're like, no, you need this, then I can be like, it's okay if I have to take this, and that's not me being weak or being or giving control or being dependent. And I still don't love the fact that I take medicine like when we hit the pandemic, I was almost like people that were stocking up on toilet paper, and I'm like, I'm refilling my meds.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you don't want to be stuck without them, and I didn't like that feeling. But I mean, we all have something.
Exactly.
And where we have needs.
And again, you wouldn't say that same thing to somebody that was taking insulin for diabetes.
100%. Well, and I think that's what people forget is how, physical anxiety, depression, personality disorders are. It's not just an emotional thing. And I think sometimes we want to just make it an emotional thing because it's easier to understand that way. I think you're exactly right, Jason, with all the stigma. It's such a misunderstood situation that we just try to find, we want to black and white it. We want to make it real easy for us to wrap our minds around. And it's just not one of those things. It's difficult. And it's so personal too, because many times it's, there's in some cases, anxiety and depression can be just physiological, but then a lot of times it is environmental, it's relational. And so that makes it even trickier, I think, sometimes to accept. So, I wanted to talk a second because so in the book, so as I'm reading this, I'm laughing because I'm like, okay, my counselor, Kevin, has worked with me a lot on breathing exercises, but it's funny. My husband doesn't battle with mental illness at all. But there'll be different times where I'll come home and tell him different things I've learned in counseling, like grounding yourself to the moment, like looking around at different things physically. I think you guys talked about that, like reaching out and touching things.
Yeah.
Yes. And like breathing and releasing your gut and those sorts of things. And he'll laugh because it sounds so funny. Like when you're just explaining it, you know what I'm saying? Even as I'm reading some of this, I'm like, to the person who has no experience with this, like to lay down on the ground and feel their stomach go up and down, like they're probably like, this is wacko, but it isn't, it works. So talk to us a little bit about the importance of these breathing techniques, what they're doing for us. Like why when someone reads it who's not really had any, like they'd be looking at like, this is weird, but why it's so important for us to learn to breathe correctly and to kind of release those things.
I still go back to how our brain is an organ, our nervous system is, is a part of our body. Well, and when I explain the breathing, I will tell people so often that kind of diaphragmatic breathing, so really breathing from your belly, it triggers your parasympathetic nervous system. So your sympathetic nervous system is the one that is freeze, then fight or flight.
Okay.
And that is what that thing does. And that nervous system, the sympathetic, it is the one that gives you a shot of adrenaline, speeds up your heart rate, tightens your muscles. I mean, it's doing all these things that are going to help you either run away from whatever this threat is, or whatever the threat is. So the parasympathetic is the one that comes in after that to kind of cool things down.
Okay.
And we often refer it to as a dimmer switch. I mean, it's not like an on or an off necessarily, but it's one of those things that, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to feel myself in the moment. Going to notice my breath moving up and down, maybe even count the breath.
Those
help trigger that parasympathetic response.
Okay.
You really are doing something physically,
chemically,
to calm yourself in that moment. And that's where it's kind of challenging because, like, this pooch right here in my lap. I mean, so when the threat is gone, his brain operates similarly to ours. When the threat is gone, he's going to sort of chill out.
Yeah.
Now, because we have this much better developed brain sitting on top of in here, we're the ones that continue to imagine the threat. Over and over and think like how bad that was.
Yeah.
What if it happens again? And so we're doing the thing that is, I mean, depression is always going back.
Yes.
And sort of like reliving something that was really difficult. Anxiety is going to the future. I'm imagining that it's going to happen again, but both of those lead to that physiological response.
Yeah.
Now I'm really physically feeling it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the breathing at a very basic level, and it's one of the reasons we start off with that in the book, is to begin to get that little bit of a toehold and a handle on that response.
Okay.
So
and just,
the other work, which is about, thinking about our thoughts, noticing where our spirit is. I mean, there are things that we move to later in the book, but we've got to start with the breath, with the body, some ways to physically soothe.
Yeah. Well, and again, like I love it because I know personally, even from when I take deep breaths or like when I'm actually practicing some of those, the exact, exercises you give to practice as I'm practicing those, even in my counseling sessions with Kevin, like I know how well they work, but it's just funny because in the moment you're like, I'm not going to do this. This seems silly, but it's a physiological response to get things moved out. And I love how you just explain anxiety and depression. Like depression is looking back, anxiety is looking forward. And, I've just recently had a couple of conversations with people who I think sometimes we even want to overcomplicate things. Like this particular person is just really struggling with like, if God loved me so much, why hasn't he healed me of this? Like, why hasn't he taken it away? And do you want to say something to that? You felt that you're like, ooh, yeah.
Well, to me, I had someone years ago that made this helpful distinction between having pain and having suffering. And so we experience pain, and pain is in the moment, but suffering is when we start having those kind of thoughts, which are like, will it always be this way?
Yeah.
Will it get worse?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's compounding that pain. Yes. I mean, we can notice pain and just sort of say, okay, well, this is what I'm experiencing here in the moment. And so it's not, the depression of looking back or the anxiety of looking forward. It's just, okay, this is what this is right now. I don't have to like it.
Yeah.
So he's talking about acceptance, but I'm going to go another route. Okay. So just pick him up. He's
like, chilling me. He's so relaxed.
CJ is being a little jealous today.
He is being such a diva. This is about me.
He's like that in session too.
Oh my God. So when I first started struggling with panic, I mean, I was in seminary, right? And it was like, please God, please. You talking about how like we didn't think to pray. Of course we thought to pray.
Yeah.
We're fervently praying, please God, please take this away. Like, okay, I get it. I'm mortal. I want to live. I need, please take this away. I've learned my lesson. Like you think God's got you on trial or testing you somehow.
Yes.
And then I just flat out changed my theology. God doesn't punish or take away hardship as a reward. God's just with us. Because we all go through bad things and hard things. And like you said, all of ourself is fallen. Well, our whole world is fallen.
Yeah.
So we're suffering the effects of a fallen, broken world, and we're all fallen, broken people, and we all have a type of brokenness.
Yes.
And one of the types of brokenness is panic. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't beat my kids. I don't cheat.
Yeah.
But I do have panic.
Yeah.
That's my struggle, right? That's my broken. And so I can ask God to be with me in my brokenness, because Jesus came on the cross to suffer and be one of us and to hold our suffering on the cross. So that's where I can come closer to the heart of Jesus and God's grace.
Yeah.
And that's about the best I've been able to do theologically, is I've stopped asking why me.
Yes.
And just saying, God, be with me.
Yeah.
And allowing myself to be with God in that moment. And at some point that's enough.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be better, but if God's with me and I'm with God in that moment and we can grow closer, that's enough. And throughout the years, I felt And I don't know that I would say like God did this on purpose. I don't know
Yeah.
that that's not theology either, that God had this plan.
Yeah.
That I'm predestined Dena to be anxious, so she'll write a
Yeah.
book to help other people. I don't know if you're familiar with Kate, is it Bowler?
Yes. I read her book.
Okay.
Yes.
But so I'm not finished. I'm not finished.
All right, girl, you go. I'm just sorry.
I've stopped asking why and just let God use me as best as possible in circumstances. So it is transforming. I mean, anytime you go to God in your brokenness, you will be transformed. But I still won't necessarily say, "Oh, that's why." And I've stopped asking why. I've quit asking why.
Did you mentioned her book? Did you like it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. I loved it. And I'm like, oh, I really hope she didn't dislike this. I was like, we're going to have a whole conversation about that. I loved that book. So
yeah, I read it around the time that one of our friends died from metastatic breast cancer.
Wow.
And we all had prayed for her so much. And of course she had, sought healing so much. So not everything happens for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, one of the conversations I had with someone was like, we aren't promised this side of eternity, this side of heaven, that we're going to be healed, because we are in a broken world. Things are broken. And I said, like, when we promise people, I've been to Hillsong conferences or concerts and stuff where they've promised that people in the, audience are going to be healed in that moment of their anxiety and depression. I'm like, what are you doing? You're about to ruin a ton of people's lives, because we can't make those promises this side of heaven. Like, especially when it comes to mental illness and things with anxiety and depression, because there's triggers around us 24/7, and I remember my moment when I came to the realization God was not going to heal me. I was going to be healthy. I think that's a different, I'm not healed, but I'm going to live in health, was about, 7 to 12 months after my diagnosis. I was sitting in a church and I heard a message about Paul's thorn in the flesh. And this pastor thought that it was a mental illness. And I thought, of anyone, that makes sense with Paul, right? Because you follow him throughout the scriptures. And, after his conversion, I mean, he went into hiding for 15 years because people, first of all, he had to relearn everything. But then also, I think that there's a lot of fear about how people were going to interact with him. And then you follow even his view of himself throughout scriptures. First, he's just the least of the apostles. Then he's the least of some. And then finally at the end, it's, I'm the least of all the saints. Like, I'm just the least, And then even his verses in Philippians where he talks about forgetting the past and leaning into the present in the moment. And so for me, that was the moment when God really, I felt like impressed on my heart, like, I'm not going to take this away completely, because for me, I'm a purpose person. Like, I like to know there's purpose in things. And so, but then there are certain things, like Bryant's mom dying of Alzheimer's at 70 before she even knows. My oldest kid is 8. She's going to miss out so much. Like, I don't really see the purpose in that, So there's certain things where I'm like, I can see the purpose in some things, and other things where I'm like, no, I don't see it, God. Someday you'll have to share it with me. But I think just the importance of people understanding, though, even in the middle of our mess, like, we have a message. And I think that's one of the things I try to tell people is, like, just because this may be the rest of your life doesn't mean you just stop living, or you live in fear, or you keep thinking you're a failure because you can't get it together. Like, in the midst of this, figure out what is your voice going to be and use your voice, So,
because the good news is God uses really broken people.
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, in scripture, it's almost like God prefers broken people because they're easier to work with, because they don't think they have it all together. They know they need God's help and God's strength and God's grace.
Well, I'm always like, who would you rather listen to? Someone who has it all together, or someone who doesn't have it all together, but God, I love it, that God's with them. Just what you said, he's like, so Jason, we keep interrupting you. What are your thoughts?
Oh, no. I was just going to dovetail with what y'all were saying, that there is so much in the conversion of Paul from that rigidity, rule-based, had all the right answers.
Yeah.
And move from that to understanding a God of grace.
Yes.
In the way that grace unfolded for all kinds of people that
Gentiles,
weren't expected to unfold for. I mean, that's part of what that is.
Yeah. Well, and that was my story. Like, just grew up in a very legalistic environment and had no idea what grace was. I do believe I was saved. Like, what I mean by that for those who aren't, in the church who are listening, but I believe that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, rose again. I did have that relationship with him, but I didn't think God liked me much. I really didn't. And I remember really coming to that. And I would say for me, like for people who oftentimes ask, especially people in like churchy environments and stuff, like, where does biblical counseling fit into all this? And like, I think it's the foundation, understanding how God views you. And the fact when he looks at you, he sees Jesus, like that's your identity. You have Jesus's identity. I think that's foundational, but I tried to start and stop there. And after understanding how Jesus viewed me, I went home and was fine for about a week and then started crashing again and just spiraling again. And I needed the understanding of how my brain was wiring, and just what you had explained earlier, Jason, how it was sensing danger in times where there wasn't danger, and how it was lingering on that danger, and how it was lingering in that pain. And so for me, it was a both and. I needed the foundation of how Christ viewed me, because that's important, but then I needed more than that. I needed tools to figure out what to do when I start to spiral or sense danger. So I wanted to see if there was anything else like that I'd written down, because this has been awesome. Okay, yes, I wanted to talk. Okay, last two questions. I'm keeping an eye. Oh, we're right at the end. Okay, so let's just talk about this. Your kids, they're teenagers, correct? Or are they? Okay, so I know I get a lot of people who ask me, and I even wrote a blog on this, but like fear about, our kids getting it, like it's almost like it's something to catch. Like our kids are going to get anxiety, they're going to get depressed, or I have mental illness and am I going to mess them up? And have you guys had some of those same fears? I don't know if you want to talk about your kids' mental health, but how, with the understanding that you have, and then Dena, with some of the struggles you've had, how has that influenced your parenting? Have you been fearful about that? Have you just embraced it head on?
Well, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'll say, so we have one child that's adopted and one that's biological.
Yeah.
And the one that's adopted maybe has more tendency towards anxiety than the one that's biological. So it can be taught as well as inherited. But as much as I worried, am I going to screw them up? I also had the opportunity to say, Mom is struggling with anxiety today. Here's how I'm coping with it.
I love that.
Or here's how I'm dealing with it. I'm going to go for a walk. Oh, Mom's not drinking coffee right now because I've been a little anxious. Or Mom's got a therapy appointment today.
Yep.
Because I need to talk because, I'm stressed about, I think I can say my dad has dementia and has been in ill health, and that's a stressor. I mean, that's pretty standard.
It's out of his control. Yeah. And that's,
So, and I guess, part of what that means is the way I had this adolescent come in, and she gave me this phrase, which just sticks. The only way out is through.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
So there really is just a way in which it's like, okay, the way of openness, the way of vulnerability. I mean, again, I think this ties into our Christian faith as well.
Yeah.
That's what is going to help us through that.
Yeah.
Being closed, secretive. I mean, all that leads to more dysfunction.
Yep.
It just does. We know that.
Yes.
So sometimes we do, as hard as it is, we have to walk through that truth.
Yeah. I love that.
Be honest and open about it. And some of that, for me as a clinician, if I have somebody come in, and especially if they're like mid to late adolescents, the parents in here with them, I'll say, well, tell me about the mental health history of your family.
Yeah.
About the substance abuse history. And I will look dead at that parent and then that adolescent and say, this is something you need to know.
Yeah.
Because there is a history of this in your family, then you need to be aware of it, and you need to be aware of it as you're moving into adulthood, as you're going into a world where you're probably going to try a substance here and there because they're adolescents and whatever.
Yeah.
And so you need to know if you've got some kind of predisposition to an addiction in this.
Yeah.
Health concern.
Yeah.
That's not a moral concern. That's a health concern.
Yeah. Well, that's what I usually try to tell. My oldest is 8, and she's very, kids are intuitive. So I don't go into a lot of detail with her, but when there's days that I'm struggling, I'm just honest with her. Like, Mommy's struggling with her anxiety. I'm talking to Mr. Kevin, yes, I'm going to go for a run by myself, but she likes to go for runs with me. It's like, I just need some time, and trying to just explain those things to her. And sometimes people are like, isn't she so young? I'm like, you try to be age appropriate, but kids are smart and they can pick up when things aren't right. And I think sometimes even explaining it to them makes them realize, like, this isn't your fault. Mommy isn't anxious because this is your fault. Mommy's anxious because it's something Mommy struggles with,
Yeah.
Yeah, because
So,
especially at that developmental stage, I mean, I always joke with parents that kids are really narcissistic.
yeah,
And part of what that means is like, yeah, everything's about them. They want whatever they want. But the
yeah,
other piece of that is if something happens in their environment, they
yeah,
tend to think it's about them.
That's their
yeah.
fault.
yeah,
So
yeah,
if something happens, like if mom and dad are fighting, then it's like, the kid thinks, oh, well, I must have done something wrong. Or maybe they did do something wrong and then the argument exploded. But the
yeah,
argument is about the plate that they dropped.
yeah.
It's about whatever else is going on in that conflict between the parents.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Well, this has been awesome, you guys, and we got to let Jason go so we can get to his next appointment. But we'll probably have to do this again because I've like so enjoyed this. So, anyways, check out Jason and Dena Hobbs' book, When Anxiety Strikes, and my little 1-year-old's upstairs having his own little anxiety breakdown. He's freaking out. But anyways, check it out on Amazon. I bought it. I've enjoyed it. It's been so awesome. So thank you guys so much for this time. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.